Taken from Exodus 34, verses 29 through 35. Moses' face shined with the reflected glory of God after he received the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. The sight caused the Israelites to be afraid, so Moses wore a veil to mask the radiance of God's glory, taking it off when he spoke directly with God. Moses came down from Mount Sinai. As he came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, the skin of his face was shining, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses spoke with them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him on Mount Sinai. When Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would take the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites what he had been commanded, the Israelites would see the face of Moses, that the skin of his face was shining, and Moses would put the veil on his face again until he went in to speak with him. The psalm for today is on the second page of your Celebrate. Psalm 99, Speak Responsibly. The Lord is king, let the people tremble. The Lord is enthroned upon the cherubim, let the earth shake. The Lord's great in Zion, is high above all peoples. Let them confess God's name, which is great and awesome. God is the Holy One. Almighty King, lover of justice, you have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Proclaim the greatness of the Lord and fall down before God's footstool. God is the Holy One. Moses and Aaron among your priests, and Samuel among those who call upon your name, O Lord. They call upon you, and you answer them. You spoke to them out of the pillar of cloud. They kept your testimonies and the decree that you gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them indeed. You were a God who forgave them. You punished them for their evil deeds. Proclaim the greatness of the Lord and worship upon God's holy hill. For the Lord our God is the Holy One. Here ends the psalm reading. The second reading for today is 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter, 12th through the 18th, and also chapter 4, verse 2. Since then we have such a hope, we act with great boldness, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside. But the minds were hardened. Indeed, to this very day, when they hear the reading of the Old Covenant, that same veil is still there, since only in Christ is it set aside. Indeed, to this very day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their minds. But when one returns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And all of us, with unveiled faces, seeing the glory of God as though reflected in a mirror, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, the Spirit. This comes from the Lord, the Spirit. Therefore, since in it, by God's mercy, that we are engaged in this ministry, we do not lose heart. We have renounced the shameful things that one hides. We refuse to practice cunning or to falsify God's word. but by the open statement of the truth, we commend ourselves to the conscience of everyone in the sight of God. Here ends the reading. Please stand for the gospel affirmation.
Our gospel reading for this morning is Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 43a. Glory to you, O Lord. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And now while he was praying, the appearances of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. Just then, a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly, a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Good morning.
Good morning.
Anagnorisis is a fancy word that is defined by the exact moment in a story when a character makes a realization about another character. Usually this is when the true identity of another character is revealed, or their true motivations or intentions, or their true relationship with another character. The easiest example in pop culture today is, if you're a Star Wars fan, the moment in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke says to Darth Vader, "You killed my father," and Darth Vader says, "No, I am your father." That is anagnorisis. If you're not a nerd like me and you don't really know anything about Star Wars, that's fine. I've got another example that hopefully you'll all know. In Little Red Riding Hood, when Little Red Riding Hood says, "Grandma, what big teeth you have," and Grandma says, "All the better to eat you with," and then attacks, and we realize it's the wolf, that's anagnorisis. The true identity of the grandma is revealed to be the wolf, and Red Riding Hood completely changes how she's acting in this situation. So we know what anagnorisis is. We're familiar with this trope. And we can see it here in the Transfiguration story. Peter, James, and John are up on the mountain. They think Jesus is great. Don't get me wrong. Jesus is a great guy, a prophet, a healer. But when a voice from a cloud comes and speaks to them and says, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him," when he becomes dazzling and glorified, and when he's speaking to Moses and Elijah, the disciples realize he's more than just a great guy, perhaps more than just any prophet. He's something really remarkable. Jesus' true identity is revealed. But this anagnorisis is a little incomplete. And to understand why, we have to understand another convention of storytelling, and that is a beat. A story beat is the most fundamental unit of a story. There are several beats within scenes. A beat is the smallest part. Now, a beat is defined differently by different people. Some will say it's a shift in tone. Others will say it is the moment that a character realizes their choices are not working on another character. Here's a simple example of a small beat. Imagine this. You're watching a movie. It's a teen drama, and a young girl has just come home from a date with a guy that she really liked. And her mom teases her a little bit while asking her about it and says, "How'd the date go? Did you make out okay?" And if you don't believe that a mother would say that, ask my mother, who says this all the time. But then the girl says, "I don't want to talk about it." And the mom says, "Oh, I'm sorry, what's wrong?" At that moment, the mother realized that being jovial and lighthearted was not the way to get to her daughter. She needed to be sensitive because something had gone wrong. That was a beat. A character realized that her choices were not working and changed. Beat. Sometimes beats are small. There might be several beats within one conversation. Sometimes beats are really significant. If you're watching what you think is a teenage coming-of-age story, and then all of a sudden one of the side characters gets killed, all of a sudden you realize you're watching either a procedural crime drama or, more likely, a slasher movie. Whatever the case, a beat can be genre-defining. It can completely change how you're engaging with the medium. And it also can completely change how characters are acting. A beat is a shift in the tone, in the motivations of the characters going forward. Now, there can be several beats, and people might shift back and forth, but for some time, there is a change in direction. The reason that I bring up beat and anagnorisis is because usually an anagnorisis is accompanied by a big beat. When you think about Star Wars again, when Darth Vader says, "No, I am your father," Luke's motivations change from trying to defeat Darth Vader to trying to save his father. There's still some good in him. When the wolf says, "All the better to eat you with," Red Riding Hood's motivations change fundamentally from trying to bring a basket of goodies to her grandma to trying not to get eaten by a wolf, or to getting eaten and waiting for a hunter to come rescue her, depending on how child appropriate you want this version of the story to be. Whatever the case, an anagnorisis usually has a really big beat. Once you realize this thing about this character, nothing can ever be the same going forward. We have to change everything. The tone, the nature of the story, and the motivations of the characters. What's interesting about the Transfiguration is we don't get a big beat. There's not really a shift in tone. There's a temporary change, but it doesn't change moving forward. It's not like you're driving along the interstate and you take an exit and move in a different direction. It's like you pause on the side of a highway to take a picture of a bird, or in this case, a cloud and two long dead people and a dazzling white figure. This is a scenic bypass, not a new direction. So why? Why does this anagnorisis not get a big beat? This problem gets even more complicated when we realize in this very same gospel, the Gospel of Luke, there's another anagnorisis with a huge beat. Later on, after the resurrection, we all probably know the story of the road to Emmaus. Two disciples are walking along the road, defeated, downcast, terribly sad. The world is now hopeless, and all that's right is lost. But on their way, the resurrected Jesus appears to them and walks with them, but they don't realize who it is. They walk with him for some time until they arrive at a house in Emmaus, and they stop for the night, and they have some supper. And when Jesus breaks bread with them, their eyes are open, and they realize who this is. Textbook anagnorisis. A character has revealed their true identity, and the other characters realize it. But this time it's different. They don't just walk down the mountain and go back to life as usual. They run back to Jerusalem. Now, most scholars will tell you that Emmaus is about 7 miles away from Jerusalem. This was not a light stroll in the afternoon that they were taking. They had business in Emmaus, or at least they were trying to get out of Jerusalem. They had motivations. There was a purpose in them making that journey. But now they've completely reversed it. They've literally changed direction. The motivations that drove them away from Jerusalem toward Emmaus before are gone, replaced with something new, the desire to tell everyone what they'd seen. This is an anagnorisis accompanied with a big beat. So the question is, why? Why does the anagnorisis, that is simply breaking bread, make so much of a bigger difference than the anagnorisis that is God showing up in the form of a cloud, accompanied with Moses and Elijah, and the splendid glorification of Jesus? Why doesn't that have anywhere close to the same effect? I don't know the exact answer, and there are probably a lot of different answers. One answer might be that at the time of the Transfiguration, the disciples couldn't have figured out what God's true nature or identity or intent was, because Jesus hadn't died yet. After Jesus died, they realize who Jesus really is and what he was really there for. But it took the cross for God to truly be revealed. Before the cross, there could be no true anagnorisis. They couldn't really understand. But I think there's more to it. Certainly the breaking of the bread has a sacramental undertone or overtone. Just a few days before, Jesus had broken bread with his disciples and said, "This is my body." So, when Jesus breaks bread with his disciples in Emmaus, it's his way of saying, they broke my body, but I'm back. I'm still here. This changes the mood to triumphant because it reminds them of his death, but also says, death is not the end of me. It's a powerful statement in which death is tied back in to the simple things, breaking bread. But that idea of the simple things is perhaps even more important here. Sometimes we experience God in our mountaintop moments, and sometimes we experience God in the mundane. But I find that often where the changes happen are much more likely the simple things. I'll explain what I mean. I have been to really amazing worship services. Some really powerful, uplifting, great music, a great sermon. Everything was amazing. And I go into that worship service and I leave that worship service and I think, wow, I really felt the presence of God. But it doesn't really force me to change my life. I'm just happy, uplifted, elated. I had a mountaintop experience. I have been to Synod Assembly and seen all the cool things they do there. And I've been to youth rallies and seen great speakers talk about their faith. And these things are all very important. We need our mountaintop experiences. We need to see God's glory. But the biggest changes in my life have not been those experiences. The biggest changes have happened when I'm really busy and don't even want to talk to anyone, but someone comes to me and says, hey, I need help with something. I need your help. And in that moment, I have to reevaluate my priorities and ask myself what really matters. That is a change. Being busy, being miserable, being exhausted, and someone asking me to reevaluate my priorities. That is a change. It's simple. It's not spectacular. It's mundane. But it's a bigger beat. Sometimes there's someone that I think, boy, I'm really not going to get along with you. We don't agree on politics, we don't agree on religion, we don't agree on any sort of philosophical idea, we have nothing in common. And then I have dinner with them and I think, wow, we could be good friends. I was wrong. My assumption was wrong. I need to reevaluate how I make decisions about people. That meal with someone I didn't think I was going to like, that is a big beat. It's simple, the mundane, but sometimes it's the harsh, the scary, where God is revealed, where we see the true anagnorisis and God comes to change our path. One more movie example. I don't know how many of you have seen The Patriot, the Mel Gibson movie from like 2003 or something. But in that movie, there's some side characters who have a really interesting arc together. In Mel Gibson's band of patriots, there's one guy who's a racist. He does not like black people. And then there's a black guy in their same company. And throughout the movie, the racist guy kind of makes a few jabs at the black guy. He's not welcoming. He's not nice. He wears his racism on his sleeve. But as they line up for the final battle, and they realize that this might be their end, it's very possible that they would die in this fight. As they're marching into battle, the racist guy turns to the black guy and says, I'm honored to be fighting with you. Honored. It's such a powerful moment. His racism was changed. He was pulled into a new direction, a shift in tone, a beat. But it wasn't because he had some mountaintop experience. He didn't go to a 3-day retreat on how to become not racist anymore. He didn't have a stern talking to by someone. They just existed together. They fought alongside one another. They had to trust each other. And that was enough to produce a change. Sometimes it's not the bright mountaintop experiences. It's the war, the distress, disasters, suffering, and sorrow. A loss of a loved one, a bad breakup. Someone you really care about moving away because they took a job in another state and you know that they're just not going to be in your lives anymore. These tragic, mundane moments that are all too real, all too human, all too ordinary, these are also the vessels in which God reveals God's self, where we experience anagnorisis, and we have an opportunity to reevaluate things, understand where we are. God pulls us in a new direction, a beat. Thanks be to God. Amen.